This is a tremendous privilege. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to first read his introduction here and then tell you what I know about Stan. Mr. Stan Jones is the president and founder of Complete College America. He's been involved in higher education for 3 decades, serving as Indiana's Commissioner of Higher Education and as a state legislator in Indiana. Stan and I got to know each other working on dropout policies and legislation in Indiana that once we were able to get it passed in a very bipartisan way, has created a set of tools on those issues that have improved Indiana's dropout rate from 70% to almost 90% now over a period of 6 or 7 years. And I would just want to say about Stan Jones is, I don't want to undercut your bona fides here, but there's nobody I know who has a bigger heart for kids. There's nobody I know who has spent more time working on these issues, trying to truly understand what we can do to create better opportunities for young people in America. And there's nobody I know more willing to set party and politics aside and find the true common ground that can make a difference for young people. And it's my pleasure to introduce Stan to the committee today.
I'd like to start in a different place. During the worst of the recession, we had record enrollment in our colleges across this country. So people were voting, saying, in essence, our way to a better economic future is to go back to college. The freshman class, not only being bigger, it was more representative of America than it's ever been. There were more African Americans, more Hispanics, more first-generation students, more contemporary students than ever before. And certainly we should be proud of this record enrollment in terms of access. But we also have to ask the question, what happens to these students after they start? And if we look at the spring graduation day, who's there? At a community college, 2/3 of those that start have dropped out. If we look at four-year colleges, especially the non-flagships, we've lost half of those students. And so for many of them, those dreams are not realized. For the transfer students that Representative Miller spoke of, 1/3 of community college students transfer, 1/3 of those graduate, so 11% of those students that started at a community college intending to get a bachelor's degree are successful. We also know that, unfortunately, far too many of these students start out their college career in remediation. It's overwhelming. At community colleges, 60% of students start in remediation. In some cities like D.C., 90%, Chicago, 90%, Philadelphia, 80% start in remedial courses. It's true at many of the four-year open access institutions as well. We also know that when you start in remediation, you immediately your chances drop by 50% as to whether you're going to graduate. Only 10% of those starting in remediation at a community college ever get a degree or certificate of any kind. And one of the, I guess, more profound statistics is that 70% of those that are in community colleges referred to remedial math within 2 years don't even attempt a regular college math class. And otherwise they don't even get to go. Many students start a remedial class, that's their first college experience, that's their last. They didn't like math in high school, they find themselves in remedial math. We also know why remediation doesn't work, and it's because of attrition. Some students are placed in 3 levels down of mathematics, fractions and decimals. Only 1% of those students ever get a degree or certificate of any kind. Some students spend a year or even 2 years taking remedial courses. They never get degrees. There is a different way to think about this, and that is think about remediation not as a prerequisite, but as a co-requisite. Not something you have to do before you start, but something that you do when you start, more time on task. It could be as simple as taking 4 class hours rather than 3, staying after class 45 minutes every class, having assigned tutoring 2 hours a week. And those practices have shown extraordinary results. Just to point to 2, one is in Carnegie Mellon, I'm sorry, not the Carnegie Center for Advancement of Teaching and Learning, at 30 different colleges, offer a statistics course and a quantitative reasoning course. Their success rate has gone from 5% to 55% in 1 year. In Indiana, my home state, across the state, a statewide community college, their success rate in English has doubled from 25 to 50%, and math has gone from 10% to 50%. These strategies can work, and they can work in a big way. We don't, as Complete College America, our single focus is on college completion. We work with 34 states. Remediation is a part of what we do. We also work on other strategies like performance funding, like encouraging students to take 15 credit hours. There are more students taking 12 credit hours than taking 15 as incoming freshmen. So those taking 12, they're already on the 5-year plan before they even get started. So what role can Congress play? 2 roles. One is the federal government collects a lot of data in what's called iPads. You have not been collecting, the government has not been collecting graduation rates, for example, on these remedial students I spoke of. You do not collect graduation rates on Pell students, where we spend billions of dollars every year. We don't collect graduation rates on adult students, the contemporary students that we're talking about, or veterans. So we don't know those answers. So that's the first place, and I think that's a simple fix, but that would drive policy. The second place is, as you look at HEA, consider incentives for students to take 15 hours, incentives to progress toward a timely degree, incentives to graduate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ask a series of questions. Mr. Jones, I'm going to start with you. There was a suggestion here that we actually talk with colleges about these issues, and we have done that. And I wanted to address the ability to benefit program. I appreciate that the President's budget would take some steps to restore Pell Grant eligibility for some students without high school diplomas. Can you talk about whether enough is being done to help contemporary students returning from the workforce without high school diplomas across career pathways and post-secondary education?
Well, if you look at the graduation rates for adults, returning adults, and most of these students are coming back as part-time students, the graduation rates are very, very low, about 15%, community college or four-year college. And students that go part-time all the time, which are a lot of these adults, they're less than 10%. And so for these returning adults, they really need to go into different kinds of programs that meet their needs, more certificate programs that have shorter-term objectives, more structured programs, and maybe programs that are more directed at the workforce. But if they come back to traditional universities and colleges, they won't be successful because the programs aren't designed for it.
I'd like to talk a little bit, and want to welcome a colleague from Indiana, Mr. Jones, to focus a little bit on remediation and ask you if you could explain a bit about Indiana's model. I am a Hoosier and actually served at Ivy Tech Community College, but I don't think we talk enough about remediation issues in all of our colleges and all of the programs. And I think it's a huge impediment, particularly for the contemporary student. At what was called the Indianapolis Economic Club, the president of Ivy Tech had everyone in the audience take the math test for college entry. And all business leaders who were present, and there were several hundred people, had an abysmal pass rate answering the pass rates or answering the math questions that are on the exams. And now we are asking adults to come back who maybe did poorly in math, probably did do poorly in math in high school or grade school, and to try to get into college level math or college level English. And I'm curious, first, if you could share what Indiana has done specifically in a fairly short period of time to increase remediation pass rates, but I'm curious what your other institutions, because this is not an Indiana problem, this is a national problem that I don't think we focus on enough. Mr. Jones?
So yes, all the tests, there have been studies that 1/3 to 1/2 of students are misplaced because of the testing. And so that's why large numbers to actually test keep them in remediation. They don't allow them into college campuses, classes. What Indiana's done, Ivy Tech's done, statewide scaling, they're one of 7 states that are putting this new model, co-requisite, where students are taking the courses with support rather than taking remedial courses before. And they're showing these huge success rates, math going from 10% to 50%, English from 25 to 50%. The math issue that you raised, what Indiana's already also done and others are doing, is that college algebra has been the de facto standard across the country. The only purpose for college algebra is calculus. If you're in tourism, if you're in psychology, you don't take calculus. And yet all those students were being made to take college algebra. So a lot of colleges are rethinking this and putting students in statistics and quantitative reasoning that better match the programs they're in and are in context. And then the last thing that Ivy Tech is doing statewide are these very prescriptive guided pathways, so there's a clear path to graduation for many of these students.
Mr. Jones, I strongly believe that our nation cannot meet its college completion goals without graduating greater numbers of Latinos, students of color, and low-income college students. Can you share your views on what states and institutions can do to help these student populations succeed and graduate from college? And can you also speak specifically to the issues of articulation and transfer agreements that I asked Dr. Bowman?
Yes, you're absolutely right about the changing demographics. And as I said in my opening, we are doing a better job of attracting Hispanics and African Americans to go to college, but we're losing them in remedial classes and along the way, and their graduation rates are much lower than they are for white students. There's a few colleges, for example, Georgia State University in Atlanta, their Hispanic, African American, and white rate is exactly the same. The same is true with Florida State University, and they've done that with pretty clear pathways, academic maps, semester by semester, fixing the remedial problem, and having what they call intrusive advising.
Expired. Mr. Messer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this important hearing. I'm sorry I've had to be in and out. I'm also in the Budget Committee markup today as well. I wanted to talk a little bit, follow up on the Chairman's earlier comments when I was here about data and the importance of data in driving reform. It's important for consumers to know what they're getting into, but it's also important as policymakers to help us understand where we can best make changes. You know, I saw in Indiana, probably of all the reforms we made at the high school level in graduation rates, were the reforms that accurately calculated graduation rates. You know, prior to that change of the last 6 or 8 years, all across America, we thought we were graduating 80 or 90% of our kids. Turns out we weren't. And once we started to count accurately, reform followed that. And so I wondered if anybody on the panel would like to comment a little bit about the importance of accurate data in helping drive the right kinds of outcomes. Sure.
So yes, and we collect data from 30 states primarily because iPads doesn't collect some of this data. Like iPads does not collect remediation data. It doesn't collect how many credits it takes to graduate. For example, students that should be getting 60 credits for an associate degree, they get 85. It takes about 140 credits rather than 120. And so all these pieces are missing, and I think you're right, it's consumer friendly information. It's also what policymakers need. And I would point out that maybe there can be some trade-offs, some things we're currently collecting that are relics.
Well, if I have enough time, my other question here was going to be, it's disturbing, one of my colleagues brought it up earlier, for the remedial situation, to see students going in, taking remedial courses, using their Pell Grants to do that, and then sort of, before they even get out with credit, having dissipated a lot of that money on that basis. Should we be looking at our policy of when and how an institution gets reimbursed for those courses in order to drive them towards some of the more best practice, or the better best practices that make sure this doesn't happen? Mr. Jones?
If I could, I think both states are starting to do that, put higher standards of progress in their state financial aid systems. But the real key is that, as Representative Miller said, these students run out of money before they graduate. Some of them run out of money before they transfer. And so if you want to talk about affordability, a more timely progression toward graduation is key. And when you get to HEA, I think there's a number of incentives or directives that you might be able to put in HEA for more timely graduation.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, so do you have those recommendations somewhere in writing that you could direct us toward, or is something we should just get back to you on?
What we have are state policies, but happy to share those with you.
So we are about to wrap up. Before we do, I want to recognize Mr. Miller for any closing comments he may have.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much. I think this has been a very helpful panel to us as we think about the reauthorization. Mr. Jones, I still can't reconcile everything I heard this morning and your third paragraph in your testimony. You say, when you look at the numbers, shows how serious the challenge is for our country. Only 4% of full-time students complete an associate's degree on time, and that is 2 academic years. And at non-flagship four-year institutions, only 19% complete their degree on time. And I understand that every student isn't coming there to run the traps over a 4-year period, and it's neat and it's compact, and that's the way it is. That's not true. These are still really kind of alarming figures. Am I not digging? Are you digging too deep, or we're not digging deep enough? Where's the mismatch here between a lot of testimony today and these figures?
Clearly, not everybody's going to graduate in 4. Not everybody's going to graduate in 2. We understand that.
I understand that.
These are full-time student numbers, and yes, they're alarmingly low. And yes, and that's why, as you pointed out, these students run out of money before they graduate. And so, yes, I think it's something that, again, I hate to go back there, data drives policy. And with a better data system at the state level, at the federal level, we could be more informed about these kinds of issues.
I went and visited one of my state colleges, and they use I think it's a circuits course from MIT. That's if you want to become if you want to in the engineering, whatever type, you got to pass that course. And 70% of students were failing it, and 70% of the students that failed borrowed money, came back and took it a second time because they want to be engineers. They introduced the MOOC from MIT, and 70% passed. And one of the things they discovered, which I think a lot of professors discovered, is after in a 75-minute lecture course, after about 7.5 minutes, you have more energy dreaming asleep than you will do listening to the course. And so this was maybe a better way to do this. But these are the kinds of things we have to think about. I don't say that will work for everybody or everybody wants to embrace that. But I would like to follow up with what Mr. Tierney said. I think if we get to the HEA, that we think about the incentives to start to change this, but I can't give up on this data, because if nothing else, it may force some students to think as they set out on their plan. And we're reminded all the time in this committee from various witnesses that 80% of our students who are going to college are going there to get a job. We can think of all the other romantic reasons why they're going, but the recession had a big impact on families and students. Okay, so that's where they are, no matter which school they're going to, how elite or how close to home. And I think we have to keep that in mind, and we can't live with these figures. We can't live with it as taxpayers, because we're not getting a return on that money that we're putting out.
Well, I would just, and as we talked about remediation, as we talked why we have students that could take 15, take 12, they're already on the 5-year plan. And so there are a number of these policies that in HEA you could put direction in. And we have had some states, Hawaii, for example, Utah, for example, adopt, I think we have 15 states working on 15 to finish. And so some of it is changing the culture of thinking about completing and not just thinking about getting them in the door. Most states have a 10-day count. They count you after the 10th day.
I don't know if I'm right or not, but I think a pretty definitive report on remediation sort of scorched this program about 5 or 6 years ago, which really said that this is a major impediment to any notion of completion.
We put one out called Remediation Bridge to Nowhere. The Community College Research Center continually documents the failure of remediation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all of your contributions this morning.